Episode 66 with Danny Rader, super guitar player based out of Nashville, Tennessee. He's a top session player there. He's played on everyone's album that you could ever imagine. Some people like Jason Aldean, Kenny Chesney, John Party, Sugarland, Carrie Underwood, Reba McEntire, Midland, Luke Bryan, Garth Brooks. That's just naming just a few. So he's certainly in high demand. He's also been performing with Keith Urban on the road for the last 10 years, so he's been a very busy guy. We had a lot in common. We had a great conversation, and I know you're going to get a lot from this particular podcast. Also, don't forget our sponsors, Morning Buzz Coffee, based out of Hamilton, Ontario. Great coffee. They'll ship it right to you. I drink it all the time, so make sure you check out morningbuzzcoffee.buzz. Also, you can find second sponsor, Music City Canada, on the web as well, musiccitycanada.com. You find information here. It's your one-stop music shop there. You can get anything you want. They'll ship it right to you. Great guys, great prices. Make sure you check that out. Also, Stickman Clothing Company. You can check out their address right up here as well. And fantastic people own this out of Saskatchewan. And they have cool clothing wear, so make sure you check them out as well. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button. You can see all the upcoming podcasts. If you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, make sure that you hit the subscribe button or hit the like button there and leave a comment. We love to make sure you give us a nice 5-star rating there as well. Also, all my links for the podcast available at www.getmypodcast.com. We pretty appreciate you watching, and I know you're going to really enjoy this one. This is Danny Rader. Okay, we are here with Danny Rader, and nice to have you on the podcast, sitting in his studio there. Is it your home studio in Nashville?
It is, yep. I live down in Franklin, technically just south of town.
Awesome. I just had a podcast with John McEwen last night, and he just moved to Franklin like 2 nights ago.
Mm-hmm.
And
nice.
Seems like a popular spot to live if you're in the Nashville area.
So he's living in a house full of boxes right now, I bet.
He is. That was his background in his video. It's just all boxes.
Cardboard boxes.
Yeah, it was great. So you probably your studio space there is probably getting more use this year than it ever has before.
It's got a lot of use, that's for sure. Yeah, it was interesting. I've always done probably a third of my work, my session work anyway, was remote stuff where people just send me files and I knock it out here.
Yeah.
But when we quarantined for, like April and first part of May last year, everything was shut down. That was all anybody was doing, so I kind of did more through that case. And there's a few producers here and there that we've just gotten into such a good groove with it that they actually prefer to work that way now. So I'm doing more proportionally here than I used to. It's just, it's funny. It kind of totally depends on the account or the producer or how they like to work. Cause there's some guys that will always want to track with a band in person.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah.
And then there's some that are like, man, let me just send it to you. Just do your thing.
It seems
it just totally depends.
With a lot of music now in country music, there's a lot of drum programming, a lot of loops and all that stuff, where it's probably not as important to have the band all together. I mean, I think it's always great to have the band together. That's the real thing, but not as crucial as you're laying drums off the floor with the whole band.
Yeah.
And it's nice to be in a position where people trust you to send you files and they know that you're going to deliver something really great.
Part of my approach when I, stack 3 or 4 different instruments, if it's, banjo, mandolin, acoustic, and like part of my approach is always to try to come up with melodies that are going to all play nicely together.
Yeah.
So that, and even from the standpoint of when they go out to play that on the road, that gives you the opportunity to pan it out and have a real wide mix on hooks and stuff that are happening. But then when you go out to play it live, you don't have to have a 12-piece band or 90 tracks going. You can still, whatever your guitar player wants to pick this hook and play that hook, and it doesn't hurt that you don't have a mandolin playing on it as well. You're still going to hear that hook when you're hearing the song played live, and so
exactly
try to stack stuff in a way that it translates nicely to stage playing as well,
Yeah. And it's interesting. as a producer here and working on a bunch of stuff, there are certain guys I know that I can send files to, and you're going to get stuff back, and you're probably not going to have anything redone. It's just you can say, I need this. But then there are other guys that are equally as good, but need direction. May not think the same way as a producer thinks, or because it's a different mindset, right?
Right.
Yeah. So what's things like as far as COVID era and stuff with you? How have you been faring with all that stuff? It's been interesting times.
It's definitely interesting times. We've had to kind of adjust a lot of our session protocols and things like that in the way that we work in studios. There's very few times anymore, really never at this point, where the whole band goes into the control room. It used to be that we would all go into the control room, we get charts, Nashville, like number charts.
Yeah. Yeah, they're
that kind of thing.
Yep.
So we would, get our charts, listen down to the song, discuss what we're going to do. And there's, including engineers and production staff or A&R, whoever label people, there could be 12 people in the control room at any given time.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much non-existent anymore. We pretty much pass out charts and we listen on headphones at our stations spread out, everyone's masked up all day, just we've had so many cases where, we're working, we're doing the thing. And then one of our colleagues has to text everybody or call everybody and say, hey man, I tested positive. My wife got her, I tested positive and I was working for these 3 days. So they have to call everybody. And then everybody was in close contact. So then 6 people have to quarantine for and it's just like, if we have to do that every single time, it's just going to shut the whole thing down, as many times as we're moving in concentric circles and working with different people from day to day.
Yeah.
So we just have really worked hard with the AFM here in town, and a bunch of us are, doing the work quite a bit, and came up with a great list of protocols. It's like, if we're going to keep doing this, we got to do A, B, and C.
Yeah.
And it seems to be working. There's always different camps, and I hate how politicized it's all gotten these days with, that kind of stuff. But it's like, shut all that aside. Like, if we want to keep making music every day, let's be smart about this, and let's do what we need to do.
Yeah, and it's smart. It's not hard to do, right? It's simple.
It costs nothing.
Yeah,
it really costs nothing.
Yeah. I know it's up here. It's not too divided. I mean, we have people who are not for mass and that type of thing, but it's very rare. We're too polite.
Yeah. I was talking to, we were talking on a session just a couple days ago about one of the things that I've actually found, a lot of us have actually found beneficial, is now while we're listening down to the song once or twice, I've got a guitar in my hand.
Yeah.
And I can noodle around and find the parts, and the voice sings, and the drummer, he was like, I can actually tune my drums and, get settled in for the song while we're hearing it, instead of hear it, go out and then take another 10 minutes to reset your stuff. And it's like, this is actually kind of beneficial. This might even be a better way of going about it. It's interesting how that stuff kind of forces things to happen that you didn't see, but they might actually tweak the process and make it better moving forward.
It's probably a little bit more efficient. You're not having those breaks all the time and splitting and then getting everyone back in the room again and all that stuff.
Right.
So
exactly.
If you're a smoker, it kind of probably sucks because smoke breaks.
Yeah, probably so. I haven't seen anybody smoking with a mask yet. That seems like that would be tough.
Someone's got to invent a mask, right? With some type of ventilation for a smoker or something.
Have you seen up there the masks? A handful of our session buddies early on found online these masks that, they're basically like a K95 mask, but they have a little tube that comes off, and there's actually a little pack that it's like a wireless pack, like the size of a deck of cards.
Really?
And it has a HEPA filter in it.
Yeah.
And it's battery powered, but it's got a little fan in it, and it blows cool air, like cool, fresh air into the mask while you're wearing it.
Really? And if you're a bass player, or a guitar player, where you're sitting in a big room without a tight mic or a close mic, you can have this thing and it's blowing cool air on you while you're, because when you're wearing a mask, 8-10 hours a day on sessions and stuff, it can get a little annoying to have to wear it that long. But as soon as I saw those, I was like, man, that's amazing. Gotta check that out online. I'll take a look at that. Yeah, and it kind of suck if you're
link in the link in the bio or something.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe I'll do an Amazon sale for it. So a kind of a cool event for you. I saw you on stage with Charlie Pride on his what was his last time performing.
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time working with Charlie Pride up here in Canada. I'm his technical director for all of his tours, so I know him quite well. And one of my best friends has booked him up here in Canada for 30 plus years. But yeah, talk about that a little bit. What was that experience like?
He is such a sweetheart of a guy. My family, we'll get into this, I'm sure, in a minute. But, similar to you, my family had a Opry show down in Florida that operated for 35, 36 years. And we actually booked Charlie Pride a number of times back in the day, back in the, early, mid 80s and 90s. And so when I was like 4 or 5 years old, we were booking him and getting to know him, and my dad golfed with him a handful of times when he came down, and he's just such a sweetheart of a guy. And it was really neat for me personally to like come totally full circle and now to be in Nashville doing what I do now, and to have that opportunity to play for him and to help put that band together for that performance. And it was really, really cool and really special. And we didn't realize how special it was going to end up being at the time, because you can't see the future, but it was really, really special.
I felt so bad for him that he was so nervous during the actual. What was he like during rehearsal? Was he pretty good? And
It was so funny. I think he. I didn't even feel like it was. He was not nervous at all when it came to the singing and the music part of it. Yeah, that was like every time we counted off, he'd come in at the same spot. He sang it. Like that stuff is so ingrained and so old hat. But I think just the gravity of the moment and the honor that he was being presented with was just kind of like a little overwhelming for him, you know. And I think like a lot of us, he talking is totally different than singing when you're in public, and I think just like the moment just felt like a lot. I think that's probably what it was, And
it was perfect. I mean, everyone, you just sat and kind of you felt that emotion there for him, and it was pretty amazing, and something you'll probably carry with you for a long time.
That whole award show was really really interesting to be in such an intimate setting this year. With no audience, not a ticketed audience anyway. They basically had, I think it was like 50 nominees, and they each got a +1. So there were no more than 100 people in there at any point, which for an award show like that is really intimate and has never been done like that,
I watched the whole thing. I really liked it. I actually almost preferred it than any other award show I watched. It went quick. I mean, there was no legs. It was sort of like, here's the band. The band started quick, and it didn't feel like there was any quiet moments. And the performances were amazing. I just thought maybe it's something that everyone hasn't been in camera for a while, and they just wanted to give I don't know what it was, but it was something that
there was definitely a huge appreciation for, we get to do this. We're doing it, because none of us had played live or done any kind of performance artist of music. Like hardly anybody's done anything out for a year now, almost, it seems like. And so everyone was definitely like, they finally got let out of their cage again, But that was definitely an interesting energy at the show for sure.
Yeah, no, I thought it was really great. So any word on the street in town on when people are thinking they're going to start heading back out and doing shows again, or is it still pretty much have no idea yet?
It's still pretty much up in the air. Yeah, I think a lot of it's going to depend on how the vaccines roll out and how many, how much they can of the population ends up being able to get vaccinated and when. I would assume that there are a handful of artists that are probably going to hopefully try to do something in the fall, maybe, with the caveat that they may have to punt again. But, it's been interesting to see how people have gotten creative. There's still plenty of recording that's going on, thankfully. I think because everybody's got so much creative energy, they're wanting to record. But as far as the live touring thing, I would assume that some of the mid-level or smaller acts will be some of the first to be able to get back out and do it again. Acts that can keep everything contained to a couple of buses and maybe a truck. But the big tours where there's 50, 60 people, 70 people moving around, I think it's going to be at least until the fall, maybe the winter on that. But, so much depends on what the case numbers end up doing,
Yeah, and I always say it's not everyone's going to want to start all at once. I mean, it's not, you don't want everybody starting at the start line ready to go, and there's every single act known to man going to go, and it's like, because it doesn't work that way. But and the other issue is, and I've been talking to a lot of production people, and it's a lot of all these production guys, they've all gotten or are working other jobs. You know, they just they've had to go get other things. So they're going to look at it. It's like, well, I got this job now, and I got benefits, and I got this and that. How easy is it going to get crews back, local crews back, and the whole thing? It's going to be
tough to get a workforce back. Yeah, it absolutely is. And even on the musician front, there's a lot of musicians who have had to leave town, go back home, or move to a new city and pick up a new thing, or do whatever different. So like, you know, I'm on the CMA board, and there's been a lot of discussions there about how do we provide both instant relief, but also plan for the needs that are going to arise when touring does resume again, because you're going to have musicians that have had to sell all the guitars, you know, because they needed to pay the bills, they needed to pay rent or whatever it is. So there's definitely, you know, some stuff in the works to help bring relief in that way, but it's a big concern for sure.
Well, it's good that, you know, there's talks about that, and you know, there's up here in Canada, there's not a whole lot of talk about that type of thing, and it's been a struggle to, you know, keep things going. And as mentioned, we talked. I have a venue here with my family, and there's lots of money going out if you're a not-for-profit venue, or city-owned venue, but as a private venue, you're not looked at the same, which is really strange, because never taken money from the government ever in our lives, and have a great business model. Everything works. We're not in debt, and we're not giving you money. But we're going to give lots of money to all these other places that are in debt, that we've given millions of dollars to before already. Yeah. You can have more, but it's just a weird, it's government stuff, you know, it's the same everywhere. So, so let's actually go back and talk a bit about how you got going. And as we mentioned pre-taping, we kind of have a little bit of a similar upbringing, and grew up in a family band. And you started playing drums first. Is that what I read?
I did. Yeah. I started on drums. I was probably 2 when my dad would like sit me down on a drum kit, and it was boom, bap, boom, bap, boom, bap, boom, bap. And that's, you know, I'd come out in our family show and play, you know, 8 bars of that, and take a bow and run off stage, you know. But I started with drums when I was like 2 or 3. You know, once I was probably 9, I was able to, you know, come out and play. I've got an older brother who's a year and a half older than me, and he and I both kind of came through the ranks with a very similar path. And by the time I was 9, he and I were kind of splitting drum duties throughout the whole show. He kind of became our full-time drummer when he was 9. Yeah. But then by the time I was that age, he was branching out and playing some keyboards and stuff. So we kind of would split time on the drums. And at, I don't know, 10, 11 is when I just kind of started picking up a bass and figuring out how to make noise on it, or plunking around on the keyboard and guitars and that kind of stuff. So it all kind of branched out at that point. And I'm sure you know the experience of like, you just grab something and figure out how to make some kind of noise. Yeah, because it becomes part of the show, right? It's playing a bunch of instruments, and you're in a family band. It was a show thing almost than it was anything else, right? It was a show thing, and I think also like for us, it was just that was the language that we spoke. Yeah, as a family, you know, everything revolved around the shows and revolved around music in some, you know, way, shape, or form. And so it wasn't even like, hey, I'm going to learn how to play guitar. Like, I never had that conscious thought. It was like just natural development of things. It's like, there's a guitar. Yeah. And if I had a question about a chord voicing or whatever, I'd ask my uncle who played guitar, or, you know, and it was just kind of off the races, you know. In the same way, like, I feel like a lot of the comparison I'll make for me growing up on the beach was like, you know, I had a handful of buddies whose dads ran fishing boats, charter boats, you know, and those kids from the time they were like super young would be, you know, walking on little 2-inch edges around the boat, and they're, you know, tying up the sails or working on engines and stuff. And they didn't think twice about it. It was the kind of stuff that was like so foreign to me, you know.
Yeah.
I was like, when did you learn that? You know, that, but it was so natural to them because that's just what
they grew up
their family did. And that's what they grew up around. That I was probably 13 or 14 before I realized everybody didn't have a family band. Yeah. And play music, you know. I was like, you guys don't play music with your family every weekend? What's really?
Yeah. When I was that age, we didn't have a theater, but we'd play a lot of dances and the weekend stuff. Right. And so it was like every weekend, all my friends, especially in high school, they'd be partying all weekend long, and I had gigs.
You playing? Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I got a gig. And, and it was the funniest thing. I still remember going to dances, and all of a sudden you'd be playing away, and all of a sudden your high school math teacher would dance by and wave at you. And it was like, this is kind of weird. And then I had a particular shop teacher that would come almost every weekend, and he'd be going by and he'd give me this little wink and wave. And the next weekend he'd come flying by, but it would be a different woman. And he just kind of give me a wink, and he was like, give me the don't say anything. And the next couple of days later, I just show up in class, and we just had this look. We didn't say anything, but I know
that you were doing a little extra credit at some point.
I think it was.
Dirt on him.
Yeah. It was really great.
That's funny.
So who was all in the band, the family band?
So the full backstory, in 1978, my granddad, who had always had the dream of playing music for a living, he sold Hoover vacuum cleaners at the time. He was like the #1 vacuum cleaner salesman in the state of Missouri or in the state of Kansas at the time. But he just like packed the whole family up. So his 3 kids, he had 2 sons and a daughter. So my dad, his brother and sister, and all of their spouses moved down. So all of the 6 of them in that generation played.
Yeah.
And there were 9 kids in my generation, all of which played and sang to varying degrees. Yeah. And then once we started having kids, all of the great grandkids kind of would come out and sing and kind of get into it as well. We had moved to Nashville by the time we started having kids, so our kids weren't as involved in it just because we were up here and would, you know, it was about the time that the grandpa had sold the theater and they were kind of getting out of it. But so yeah, there were, you know, up to 16 or 17 of us family members on stage at any given time.
Wow, that's great. And how many shows would you do a year at the theater?
We did about 200 shows a year.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, summertime was like 6 nights a week.
Yeah.
And back in the real heyday of it, which would have been the mid 80s, probably early mid 80s up until about the 90s. Yeah. Early 90s. They would do anywhere from 600-700 people a night.
Wow.
At its peak, you know, which 6 nights a week in Panama City, Florida is a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
It went down, interestingly enough, it went down kind of incrementally after MTV started coming to Panama City Beach. And they started airing all the Panama City Beach specials and all that stuff. And I think a lot of the families that were the biggest supporters of our show, we're going to go over to Destin this year. We're going to go over to, you know, somewhere. And they, you know, the family aspect of the beach during spring break anyway, had kind of declined because people just saw what they saw on TV on spring break. And they're like, oh, I don't want to take my family there, you know? Yeah. So it kind of began to decline a little bit at that point, but it's turning around for sure at this point. It's not near what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what made you decide to move to Nashville? What was that decision like?
You know, it was kind of a combination of things, but I growing up on old school country music, like I did, I never had like the dilemma of, well, do I want to go to LA or do I want to go to New York or I don't know. Like it was always going to be Nashville. Yeah. For me, it was just a matter of when the right time was. And for me, I just feel like I had kind of gotten to a place where I just artistically wanted to go somewhere different than I was kind of being asked to go or allowed to go at a lot of the session work back home, you know, and some of the gigs that were happening back home. And it kind of coincided with a time when my wife, we got married really young. I was 21, she was 20. Wow. And I had finished community college back home and she did a couple of years at community college. And so she was going to need to get a 4-year degree somewhere and move on anyway. And so we were like, well, let's just go to Nashville. So she went to Belmont once we got here, so which was a great fit. So she finished her schooling there, and I just hit the pavement and started finding work, try to find somebody to pay me to play guitar.
Yeah. It's funny. I wanted just to go back for a second when you're saying you grew up basically just listening to old country music, which I did too. Did you listen to much else, or was that kind of it? Because for me, I didn't really get into any other type of music until I got to high school. I didn't even really know anything else existed to some degree.
Same. Yeah. I really didn't either until probably high school. Yeah. That's probably about when I started branching out a little bit, and, eventually discovered Tom Petty and the Beatles and, all that comes along with that, and some classic rock stuff, AC/DC, and all the meat and potatoes stuff that it's like, yeah, you're going to be exposed to it at some point,
Yeah.
And so then it was just like a whole different level of, oh, wow, this is awesome. This is amazing.
Yeah.
And then it all ends up kind of combining into this soup that affects your playing, and you become like a, hybrid of all of your influences,
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting. There's very few musicians in Nashville that are my age that grew up on old school country music. There's so many guys at my age that they'll break out into Rush records or Yes records on sessions, and all kinds of Van Halen, all kinds of stuff that like is awesome, but it's like that's not the vocabulary I grew up on. So I always feel like I don't have a whole lot to add when some of that stuff comes in like just random jams and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So there's very few of us that I feel like grew up on old school country music, where it's fiddle and steels and that whole thing,
Yeah, I feel the same way. There's sometimes in conversations people start talking about certain albums they listen to and certain cuts, and I'm like, yeah, I know the album, but I sorry, you lost me. But let's talk about Conway Twitty.
Yeah, exactly.
So getting to Nashville and trying to get gigs, what was that experience like? What was your first gig you landed?
It was the first gig I landed was with Billy Dean.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we had kind of gotten to know him a little bit, our family through the theater and some connections and stuff, and so my brother and I both went out with Billy and played gigs with him for I think I played off and on with him for a good close to a year, maybe.
Yeah,
something like that, which was a great like stepping stone, and Billy was so awesome and great to encourage us and give us a shot when we probably weren't even ready yet, but he was so cool and great to bring us into the fold. And then I got a gig with Carolyn Dawn Johnson.
Oh, nice.
Shortly after that,
fellow
and
Canadian,
ended up kind of switching over there. Yeah, right. She's what part of Canada is she from? It's Fort McMurray, I think, is where.
Yeah, but I think she lived in Winnipeg for quite a while. But I think originally
she's
from
an Alberta
there.
girl, I think, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But but so I did about a year there, and I met a handful of like. That's where I got a little more connected to some of the younger, more up and coming scene of musicians, and that kind of led to plenty of different stuff after that, But
so were you doing as far as session work goes? Was there much to be had at the beginning, or is it kind of a slow climb there?
Definitely not in the beginning. Actually, one of the first kind of shots I got to be in a studio regularly here in town was on the engineering side of things. There's a Southern gospel producer, Michael Sykes, who did a bunch of records for like the Oak Ridge Boys and Jeff and Sherry Easter and the Gaither Vocal Band, and Michael gave me a shot, and it was just one of those like I was kind of going in to meet him and trying to get plugged in and maybe get on his list of be called as a player, and I'm sitting there talking with him, and he's kind of asking me, so what brought you to town and that kind of thing, and he was in the middle of working on an Oak Ridge Boys record, and he said, "You do any engineering?" And I said, "Yeah." "You want to engineer some vocals on Monday?" "Sure, yeah." So he had me come in, and I ended up being his, kind of go-to engineer to cut all his vocals and clean up vocals and tidy up stuff before it gets sent off to mix for probably a good year and a half.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think. And that was a really good opportunity for me to just really get comfortable in the studio and, learning Pro Tools shortcuts and really getting at home on that stuff,
Yeah.
And I was cheap.
That's even better. Well,
So that was kind of my first opportunity there. And then, the playing stuff kind of just steadily got more frequent and over time ended up getting more, more records and less demos, and, got to the point where I was able to kind of get a pretty good amount of stuff. One of the first producers that called me a bunch was John Rich. Actually, I got to know who's become a really, really wonderful buddy, Adam Schoenfeld. I'm sure you know him or probably talked to him at some point. Yeah. Adam kind of made me his go-to acoustic guy at a certain point, and got me in with John, and I did a bunch of records with Adam over the years, and he was really one of the first guys to pull me in for like my first master record, that was like an actual proper record, tracking with everybody there at the same time, and that was a really cool shot for me.
It was interesting looking. I took a look at All Music and kind of took a look at everything you've been playing on, and it was sort of like, gosh, you play bazouki in a lot of projects. It's sort of like
that is, that's, I don't even know where that came from, but it's funny. So one of the first big records that I got to work on at the time was for Jewel. Oh, wow. And John was producing that record, and I remember just having the conscious thought before I went into the studio. I was like, I want one more like jangly thing that I can offer as an overdub option that's not just a mando or not just a 12-string acoustic or whatever. And I went down to Corner Music, which has moved now, but it used to be right on 12th downtown here in Nashville. And and I remember just kind of like picking stuff up off the wall, and I came across that bazouki. It's made by Trinity College, and it just was like, this is awesome. This is great. Like every voicing I tried to play sounded killer on it. And so I bought that. It was like, I think it was like $600-700 at the time. Which was like, I knew what I was going to make on the session, so I knew I could float it till that money comes in and that kind of thing. And so, but that thing has just taken on a life of its own, and there's so many people that like that's just like it's such a cool texture to layer into a track, because it doesn't take up as much space as a 12-string acoustic, and doesn't make it sound super folky or whatever like a 12-string can do at times. But it adds so much more jangle than a regular acoustic does. And it's the way that I kind of approach it. Usually it allows me to really drone and cover certain melodies, and if I hear something being played on another guitar or piano, I can work that into my strum so it still has a cool thing to it. And it's funny, there's a lot of guys that my favorite is Chesney always calls it the bazooka. Put that bazooka on this track.
That's great. So I imagine with that instrument, it's not something that you'd be getting called for, but you'd have it with you, and it'd be something that you say, hey, let me try putting this on. Is that kind of how you got people?
Certainly in the beginning. Certainly in the beginning, it was that way. It's like, let me try this one other thing. Let's add one more pass and see if you like this. And but there's actually a handful of guys at this point. They're like, if they're sending me overdubs at the house, they're like, definitely want bazooki. I want some banjo, and I want some acoustic and some electrics. It's like, so it's definitely, I don't know if it's become my thing. It feels weird to say that, but there's definitely a lot of people that like what it does to a track, for sure.
That's awesome. And now as a guitar player, I mean, obviously we've seen you lots on TV and everywhere, being the kind of guy with Keith and playing electric, but you're playing a lot of acoustic on a lot of projects. That's a skill that's completely different than being the electric guy.
It is. It's a very different hat. That is for sure. Early on, I think I had a bit of a feeling of like, well, they didn't call me for electric, but I guess they'll give me a shot on acoustic, and I felt like it was kind of second chair for a while. And but I remember at a certain point, I can't even remember who it was. Maybe it was either like Jeff King or maybe it was JT Cornfluss. At some point we were on a record and I was doing some acoustic, and it was like a really exposed, just me and the vocal for like the first verse, chorus, and the band didn't even enter till way later. And it was one of those things, there was nowhere to hide in this track, kind of thing. And I remember one of those guys saying, "Man, I'm glad it wasn't me in that chair," and it was like kind of one of those moments where I went, "Oh, okay," and I really just like took ownership of it and realized this is not, not something, it's not a backseat thing, that it's its own thing. And I realized that I, was getting particularly good at approaching the acoustic instrument side of things, and the way that I attacked the guitar was different than a lot of acoustic players. And just kind of like, took ownership of it. And I was like, okay, it's a very different thing. The interesting thing is that there's a lot of days where a lot of producers that just will have me bring all my stuff, and so if we track 6 songs in a day, 4 of them I'll be doing acoustic stuff, but then the other 2 is we're tracking with all electrics, and I'm playing electric on those songs. And the thing that I've really had to work at in some ways is the quick transition and mindset from acoustic to electric.
Yeah.
Is even like how hard you attack the guitar and your touch and that kind of stuff. People don't realize what a different approach that is. Even though it's guitar, it's still
totally different. Yeah.
Totally different mindset. And it's there's times I feel like it takes me a good 15 minutes to like just kind of reset and reframe and, reset on the different thing,
Well, it's an amazing skill to have, because it's certainly not, there's lots of guitar players, I would say. I mean, there's, there's lots of guys that can crank it up and play, but there's always just a handful of acoustic guys that really get that. It's always, I always put it towards being a fiddle player. There's a lot of violin players who can play the violin very well. Right. But you ask them to play a fiddle tune and they'll fall to pieces.
Totally different mindset. Yeah.
And that's the same thing with a lot of electric players. They're, they get comfortable trying that, but you give them an acoustic and it's like, they'll get through it, but it's not what it should be. But it's two specific skills all together. And it's almost, for me, not that respect comes in to play, but you almost feel like if someone can really handle an acoustic well, that's a whole other respect level in my mind. Anyways, that's another step up.
One thing that's interesting about it is, and I've always felt this way, is that like there's so many ways to affect your sound on the electric side of things with effects and pedals and pickup choices and that kind of stuff, but the acoustic guitar literally is going to sound like what you make it sound like. There's no, it's literally all in your hands. There's nothing to change the sound of the guitar. And I think there's something cool about that is, it is what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's astounding to me how the same guitar, when I pull it out of the case and I play it, depending on the mic setup or what preamp they're using or how they're feeding the headphone boxes or any of that stuff, like it's amazing how different the same guitar can sound from one day to the next.
Yeah.
On even an acoustic where you're like, why would this sound any different than it did yesterday? But it can be wildly different from one day to the next.
Yeah. And it's like finding that, and I find that same thing with, I'm playing fiddle on a session or anything, and it's finding that spot, right? It's just you just got to move that guitar, because there's so many guys who'll just put a mic here and you sit there. It's at the 12th fret or it's behind here or whatever you want to do. Yeah. And it's not that. It's being smart.
A couple inches can make a huge difference in one way or the other if it's here, or even just getting closer to the mic or backing away just an inch. Can make a big difference in how it sounds in the control room.
And if you're finger picking or if you're strumming, and it's all, it's going to be completely different from wherever you are, and being able to know where that, and probably your engineering background too, would really help you listening and finding that spot. Right?
When I started like years ago, and one of the first guys that kind of encouraged me to explore with it was Bukovac. Just taking the pick and flipping the pick around or using different sides of it just to soften up the sound or, that kind of thing. Keith uses those Tortex, these guys.
Yeah.
And for the real khaki telly stuff that he does, he always turns it around so the part with the texture is actually what's plucking the strings.
Oh, neat.
So that's what makes it really, and just messing around with things like that, I started really exploring with that a handful of years ago, and that opened up a whole new world sonically of like ways to make your guitar sound different than just strumming, just playing it, and you realize how much control you have over the instrument.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
As opposed to feeling like, oh, the guitar sounds like what it sounds like. Why isn't it darker? Like make it darker,
Yeah.
So you really learn how to take control over the guitar rather than it controlling you,
Exactly. So obviously, you were playing lots and doing lots of gigs around town and touring lots, and eventually you got the Keith Urban call. There must have been. There's got to be a story in that call. In that.
Yeah, actually, there is an interesting story there. I had played with Gretchen Wilson for a handful of years, and I had gotten a call from Chris McHugh, who was Keith's band leader at the time, to come out and do some shows with a girl that Chris was kind of helping consult and musical direct for. He wasn't going to be in the band, but he was putting the band together. Yeah. And I had never had the opportunity to work with Chris yet. And I was like, anything I can do to get on that guy's radar, both from a session standpoint and the Keith gig, if something were to ever possibly happen there. But it was such a long shot. I wasn't expecting that at all. Yeah. But I just was like, something to get on Chris's radar. Yes, absolutely. And so I went and auditioned for that and ended up getting that. And that was a great, great band on that gig. And did it for a little bit. And then the girl that we were playing for decided she wanted to like do more movies or, the TV shows and this and that. So she kind of branched out and did her own thing. And so then the rest of us were like, well, now so I got this like killer band. And so we all kind of went back to different stuff. But right about that time, Gretchen asked me to come back and she had transitioned with some stuff and she asked me to come back and band lead for her. Yeah. I was like, okay, that'd be sure. It kind of worked out timing wise. And so I went back and I wasn't back there for, I don't know, a month and a half maybe as her band leader. And then Chris calls me and says, hey man, actually the first question he asked me was, do you play B3? And I said, yeah. Why? What's up? I'd never played B3 in my life. But,
I've done that before.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's like, okay, well, all right, stand by. And so, a day or two goes by and and he asked me, he's like, man, would you be into coming out with Keith? He wanted, at the time, I think Keith was looking to add a keyboard player that also did a little bit of like strummy stuff if they needed it, But I think Chris and some of the other band guys were like, we need somebody we're going to need more banjo. Like this guy's going to end up doing more of that stuff than he is keys. So they kind of were like, I think they all knew I could cover enough keys to do what he needed keys wise. Yeah. And I think they were basically just trying to frame it so they could get me in the band. I think it's kind of what it was painted to me later on, but it was one of those like, yeah, I play B3. Sure. So I went out and bought a B3 and learned how to play it. Once I knew that I was going to have the gig. And so I had a B3 up in my garage for a couple of months till the first gig that we needed to do happened. And I was just like learning how to work the drawbars and drawbar settings and even how to turn the thing on. I had to like call a buddy. I'm like, so which lever do I hit first? And it's like,
what's this weird connection with all the things coming?
Yeah, exactly. How does that, because it's like you have to hit the start button first and let it warm up for 5 or 6 seconds and then hit the run button. And it's like all this stuff. I was like, I don't want to blow this thing up. Like, teach me how do I turn it on? So I called Murph Wonka, who's like the B3 guru here in town. And he kind of gave me the crash course in 15 minutes and showed me what I needed to know. Yeah. So then, once I got in there, I was like, when I started with him, I was actually doing keys on almost half the show, maybe when I first started. Oh. And then it was acoustic jangly stuff and electric on a few songs in the beginning. But it was, I really I've always enjoyed the challenge of learning something new and getting to branch out a little bit and be challenged and uncomfortable a little bit. So the idea of playing a cello line with my left hand over here while holding down the B3 pad on this side and singing a background at the same time was like, sure, yeah, that sounds fun. Let me learn how to do that, and so we just kind of dove in and it worked out great. But it was kind of has always seemed funny to me that I think Keith, when I started that gig, was under the impression that I was a keyboard player first. When I first came in, obviously awesome. You realize later on, but I think that was the initial sell, which is hilarious to me.
I would have crapped my pants. I was like, oh, I've done that for a gig where I, can you play this? And say, yeah, you kind of play it, but it's sort of like,
right. I had the same
absolutely.
experience with accordion. That's why I play it now. The first tour I was doing with Keith, we were on stage at Municipal Auditorium doing full production rehearsals and working up Making Memories of Us, I think was the song. And I was playing the keyboard parts from the record with just a little cello line and some pad and a little piano. And he just wanted to change it up, do something different with it. He's like, do you have an accordion with you? I said, oh, I don't have it with me. I'll bring it on Monday. I'll bring it on Monday. We can play around with that. That'd be great. That'd be awesome.
Amazon.
And, so I immediately left rehearsal and called a buddy of mine. I was like, dude, can I borrow your accordion this weekend? I got to learn how to play it.
That's awesome.
Ordered one. And I can't even imagine the awful sounds that my wife had to endure that whole weekend at our house while I'm trying to learn how to control the bellows and figure out how to make some kind of noise on it.
Yeah. You had to scratch it up a few times to make it look you've had it.
Exactly.
Throw it around.
Exactly.
That's great. So what was it like, your first tour with Keith? Obviously he's, an awesome person to tour with, I imagine. What was that kind of lead up to getting out there? Were you just jumping on the beginning of a tour, or you were just kind of...
I came on, so he was coming off a year where he had kind of downsized the band and was just doing like festivals and some corporates.
Yeah.
And they added me in like September. And so we did a couple of corporates. The first gig that I did like public performance with him was the halftime show at the Thanksgiving Day Cowboys game.
Honey.
So it was like, off you go, major televised thing. And so we did that, but the first tour I did, we started production rehearsals, I think in like April of the next year, and we kicked off in like May, something like that.
Yeah.
And so I kind of got my feet wet a little bit with a few like kind of lower profile performances, and then we had plenty of time before the actual tour to work up arrangements. And the very first musical rehearsals I did, Keith wasn't even there for. It was just the band for a couple of days working up stuff.
Yeah.
So that was kind of nice to have a little bit of time to kind of get my bearings, before feeling like you're totally thrown into the fire, But it was, Keith he loves to dive as deep as he can into rethinking arrangements and changing stuff up, and really never wants to just settle for the same way that he did it on the last tour. So he's always looking to change things up and rework things, and so it offers an opportunity to kind of keep relearning the thing. Most of the songs that we played out there, but because the personnel in the band changed over time, and because he wanted to rethink how we played it, a bunch of those songs I played 3 or 4 different instruments on over the time we were there. So a song that I played keys on the first couple of years, the next couple of years I was playing bazouki or let's see, hang on, my Zoom is doing something squirrely here.
That's right. You got very bright all of a sudden.
Did I really?
Yeah. Your screen just kind of lit up.
There we go. Oh, yeah, there we go. Sorry about that. I was like, Adobe needs to update. I'll update you later.
Yeah.
But like then the next couple of years I played banjo on it, and then the next couple of years I played electric on it. So it was an interesting evolution over time for sure.
That's neat. So you must have obviously played a lot of different types of gigs with Keith. Do you have some particular favorite places that besides Canada, of course, but
there was there was one gig in Quebec City that we have always talked about was the coolest gig I think we've ever played. It was some rock festival over there. Like the night before us, the Foo Fighters were headlining, and the night after us, it was the Stones. I think it was like one of those big rock festivals where it's 90,000 people or something like that. And I'd never played a gig like that. And it was one of the coolest gigs. We always talked about what a cool gig that was. You may know the name of the festival. I can't remember. It's in
there's
City.
I'm trying to remember if I was going to look, because I remember seeing that festival. I thought I had it somewhere close, but maybe I don't.
That was a fun one. There were some gigs we did in Europe that were really fun, when just the energy of the crowd and the difference in how people approach concerts and concert etiquette and protocol. Like, in Europe, there were places where it felt like they would just, in the middle of a song, break out into this soccer stadium style chant.
Oh, yeah.
And they're just like, oh, and they clearly like are all just doing their thing. And we just almost felt like we're all just part of this moment, and this thing, because it wasn't anything that was ever part of our song going into that night, but it like, they were doing this thing and it was like awesome. And Keith would answer it with a little guitar thing, and then it would evolve. And some of those moments were so cool. I think it was Glasgow was particularly awesome.
Oh yeah.
From that standpoint,
It's
Berlin was fun too. There was something that happened at that show. I remember being like, wow, that was awesome. That was so cool.
Yeah. I know. I talked to Jerry Flowers, a year or two ago. I did a podcast with him, and he mentioned the Quebec date.
Did he?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It was.
Yeah. That was a pretty special one.
Yeah. It's neat how you just get certain ones that, out of all the ones you do, this for some reason this one will stand out more than any other ones.
Yeah, it is interesting.
So as far as playing nowadays, obviously you're almost doing more session work than you're doing anything now. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean that's all I'm doing right now.
Yeah,
because there is no touring going on, and so at this point it's just playing on records, and I don't know. We'll see what the live side of things ends up looking like going forward. I don't think anybody really even knows yet, but at this point I'm just thankful to be making records. Which interestingly, that was what I moved to town to do anyway. I had no intention of ever playing live when we came up here. I was a session rat and always wanted to have headphones on all day long, and that was my dream job when I moved up here. And transitioning into producing at a certain point was always really important, which I'm kind of trying to take this opportunity since I'm home to transition into that and take steps toward that, and looking for new artists to develop and work with and help kind of come up the ranks with, and have some really fun stuff that I've gotten to work on this year through that, which has been awesome. So see where it goes. But at this point, just making records.
So what was that transition? Obviously, you're out with Keith quite a bit. It's hard to keep that studio thing going and being out and touring and being available for that. Obviously, you probably had a commitment with Keith that whatever happened there, you had to go.
Right. Yeah.
Is that a difficult thing to manage?
Yes. One good thing about the way Keith likes to tour is he really didn't ever like to be gone for more than a couple days at a time or a few days at a time. So most of our touring, as long as we were in the US or even a good chunk of Canada, we would fly back with him in between shows. So he would book like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday out. Yeah. And then we'd fly back Saturday night and be home by 2 a.m. and have 4 days at home, and then we'd fly back out the next weekend to do it again. So I wasn't, the only time I was ever really out of pocket for weeks at a time was when we would go down to Australia or Europe. There were times when Canada would, if he was basing out of LA or New York and he was chartering to and back from there, we would stay out on the road for, 10 days at a time or something like that. If it was a run across Canada, Yeah. But for the most part, it was weekend based. So we were able to kind of come in and out, and which was great because I could still book sessions Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and sometimes a Thursday before we had to fly out or whatever, and still not feel totally out of the loop. But But it's interesting how many people just kind of like, if he was in the middle of a tour, even though I'm in and out, they're like, are you back in town yet? I'm like, I'm back in town every week.
Yeah.
I'm like, I wasn't really ever gone,
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Oh, okay. Well, can you do a session on da-da-da? So it's like, yeah, sure. But there's definitely been times where, you have something booked. Honestly, I just as much for the work side of things. We always joke about this, that like, if you're ever short on work or whatever, just book a family trip.
Oh, yeah.
Because there was a stretch where literally like years in a row, every single family trip we booked, Keith would have a show come in.
Yeah.
And so we would have to like either cancel the trip or shift the days or I'd have to do the gig and then fly in and meet the family there, and so that was always like the running joke. And, just from a family standpoint, that was difficult to manage at times, because you're dealing with feeling like you're always having to disappoint or shortchange my wife or the kids, because work stuff comes in, which it's a blessing to have the work, and I'm not complaining at all, but it's definitely one of the like challenges of the job in that position,
Yeah, exactly.
And conversely, that's been one thing that's actually been really kind of nice about this year, not being on the road, is we've been able to kind of just do our own thing and not feel like we ever have to run the risk of a Keith show coming in, because it was like, well, yeah, let's go do that, or let's do this, so it's been kind of nice to have that time to reset and really focus on the family and be able to prioritize that in a way that I haven't always been able to,
Yeah, exactly. So as far as things coming up in the future and seeing what you want to do in the next 4 or 5 years, do you think have a game plan? Obviously, you're talking about wanting to do more producing and that.
Yeah.
Do you look ahead and say, I want to be here by this point? Are you that type of person, or you kind of just seem to take it as it goes?
I used to be a lot more of a like goal setter, and I would like first of the year, I would always set a goal for the next year. I find myself doing a little less of that after we've had kids.
Yeah.
Not consciously, but I feel like there's just so many ways where I don't know if you have kids or not, but like you feel like there's always something. You're always busy with something. And so I just haven't been as proactive about like, I'm going to set my 1-year goal and my 5-year goal and my 10-year goal. But I think there, are always things on the horizon that, I'm like, wanting to, just be present in the moment more, not necessarily like looking to where I want to go, because I did find there were years where it was like, it never felt like enough.
Yeah.
When something happened, it was like, it felt great. It's like, oh, you want an ACM? That's awesome. Great. Cool. And then like the next day was like the biggest letdown.
Oh yeah.
Cause then you're like, well, now where do I go? And you feel like, there's been times where I looked back and I realized I wasn't super present in that moment when it was happening. So it's a difficult balance to manage, like looking forward and planning and being proactive and also still being 100% present and appreciating the moments when you're in them, Yeah,
I think this time that we're sitting here through COVID, that's really refocused a lot of people, where we realize I really actually kind of like being at home more often and being involved with, it makes you rethink a lot of stuff.
Absolutely.
Which I think has been a good thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be...
Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's going to make it difficult, as we mentioned earlier, about getting the machine started again. Is there going to be a lot of guys who are going to be like, yeah, you know what? I'm good hanging at home.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet there are. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. No,
go ahead.
I definitely have been really wanting to lean more into the production things, though. That's if there were one thing that I would say is a goal that I want to accomplish that I haven't done or isn't part of the normal thing, it would be branching out and finding some new artists and getting the production thing off the ground.
Yeah.
That's something I've always wanted to do, and I feel like I've never really been able to prioritize it because I've had the touring gig, and then you take the sessions that come up because they, pay the bills, and that kind of stuff. But the way that the production thing kind of happens at this point, especially, you know, it's an investment of your time, and a lot of it is done on spec on the front end, and you don't necessarily make any money for a while at it, you know.
Yeah.
And it's kind of somewhat wrapped up in the songwriting in a lot of ways these days, you know. So there's that aspect of things. So it's an interesting thing, because what it means to be a record producer now is not at all what it was 20 years ago when I said I want to move to town and make records, you know. So it's an ever evolving target in some ways, but you know, that's definitely one thing I want to get into for sure.
Yeah, it seems like now a lot of producers are guys who can make beats, and
right,
you know,
the track guys.
Yeah,
yeah,
and they end up being producer guys. Because they're creating a song and creating a vibe, and it ends up being, and it's the same kind of thing, but it's just different. I mean, it's not the same as getting a bunch of guys in and figuring out an arrangement and
right.
you know, producing guys. You just kind of creating stuff as it goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is neat. It's just a different thing.
Yeah, there's things that you can create sonically and energies and vibes that you can create when you're making a record that way, that are really tough, if not impossible to do when you do have a room full of people. So there's a distinct advantage to certain aspects and certain types of records, I feel like, that you can make when you're building it like that. But there's also limitations. There's energy that you can't create that way, that only comes when you've got a room full of people at times. So to me, you know, my approach on that is always, because I do plenty of programming here at the house, and have done orchestrations and things like that, and I'm pretty diverse when it comes to that. But I always try to let my approach on that side of things be dictated more in what the artist is comfortable with and how they like to work. Yeah. You know, if it's an artist that likes to feed off the energy of a full room full of musicians, I'm like, great, let's do that. But if it's an artist that I know that likes it to feel a little more poppy and want to be able to really get inside the sound of a kick drum and listen to 20 different kick drums and pick the right one, and it's like, okay, well, let's just build the track here, and then we'll hire a few outside players on top of that if we need to add some realness to it, you know. So rather than like, this is how I work, you know, it's like, well, how do you want to work, and then let's build around that, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, makes sense. Let's talk gear real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So are you much of I'm going to go into obviously amp guy, but you fool much with Kemper and all those type of things? Or are you?
I do. Yeah, I do. I use it all. There's you know, there's none of it. I'm not too proud to use any of it. You know, I use fractals on the road with Keith. That's what my most recent rig out there was, which I loved. I especially love the consistency of it from night to night. Yeah. And the ability to program effects changes and automations and stuff. It was like, you could never do that with just a pedal board straight into an amp kind of thing. Yeah. So I love that. I use a Kemper plenty here in town, especially if it's stuff where, you know, it's a non-cartage thing and I just got to kind of bring some stuff from the house. You know, those things sound awesome. Yeah. And they feel, the biggest thing I've noticed is the last handful of years, the way they feel has gotten so much better. Yeah. But then, you know, at the same time, you can't beat a Twin 12 or a Deluxe or a, you know, I love the 65 amps. I use a Soho a lot. I've got a Soho that I've had from Dan for a long time that I just love. Nice. What about guitars? Do you have a go-to that's your and you know, one of the first generation PRS Starlas, you know, so they changed the pickups at a certain point, but the first generation of pickups and their configuration, I've got one of those that is, I use that thing so much. I love that guitar. Yeah. And I've got a Nash Guitars Tele that I love. Honestly, a lot of the electric work falls into that category. I've got 345 that I love. If that's the thing. Yeah. You know.
What about acoustic wise?
Acoustics? Yeah. I go back and forth between it's usually a Dreadnought is my main workhorse. But I go back and forth between my D18 Martin, J45, and then I've got a couple of Taylors that I love. I've got an 810 that's awesome that I use a bunch. And And it kind of, there's no rhyme or reason as to why I like one over the other. Sometimes it depends on how live or dead the strings are. And, I hate using brand new strings on sessions.
Yeah.
So if I do have to change strings on one of those guys, I'll change them. And that won't be my session acts for a while. I'll keep it at the house for a few weeks or a month till they kind of warm up and kind of get dead. But because I usually leave the strings on my acoustic for at least a couple of years. I think my D18's had strings on it for 3 years right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
I love the way they sound. And as long as you, don't let them get to the point where it's like they won't stay in tune anymore, get in tune like that. You can always tell when it's like, all right, it's too far. But Dan Dugmore told me years ago, he was like, don't change your acoustic strings, just stop changing. And I was like, really? You can do that? Because we were complaining about how they sound when they're new, and he was like, just stop changing them. And I'm like, ding, like the light bulb went off. I was like, oh, I guess I could just not change them,
Yeah. Yeah, because there's nothing worse than that sliding,
that plinky, and like it's just they're so
every time you slide through them,
bright. I'll keep them at the house and just noodle around on them for a few weeks before I take them out after I do change them.
Makes perfect sense.
But yeah, so those are the main go-to acoustics, I would say. And then the banjo I've got is that's actually a really special one. It's a Deering maple blossom. Nice. It's their like flagship banjo. That it's like a boat anchor. The thing is so heavy, but and it's just loud and obnoxious and everything. Like all that mid range that's what a banjo is supposed to be.
Yeah, that's awesome. And as far as miking up at home and that type of thing, what's your approach there?
I've got actually. Let me see if you can see it here. I've got this U47. Yeah, it's a warm audio U47. That's awesome. This is a kind of a KM84 type guy that Brett Tiergarten makes, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And then I actually also use there's a 57 right here. I've got a 57 that is wired for high Z.
Yeah.
And so I'll run that into my electric rig.
Oh, neat.
And blend that in with a little bit of like spring reverb or slap delay, and not as a spread thing, but more of like just a blend in there, and it just adds a little extra dimension to the acoustic sound. And so I'll always print, like I usually print like one main mic, either the U47 or the KM84 type 5, one of those two, and then the 57. That's usually neat. I don't usually do a big left right spread kind of guy. I just like it present right down the middle,
Yeah, I find you get weird phasing, weird stuff.
There's so many opportunities for phasing, and most of the stuff that I get called for, there's so many layers of stuff going on there anyway that a really wide sound is not beneficial.
Yeah.
You end up, it needs to find its spot in the stereo image, because there's something over here that's going to have that spot. So if you've got this really wide acoustic, then you end up having to thin it down anyway and place it that it's like, just put a mic on it,
Yeah.
I'm actually far from the like audiophile tech gear nerd. When it comes to that side of things, I'm like, just put a mic in front of me.
Yeah.
I'll play. I'm way more concerned about the melody and the part itself. That's where I spend way more time on that.
Yeah, my trick always with acoustics, and I've done it for years, and it's usually acoustic a little off here, and I always balance it kind of over here with just a bit of chorus. So I'll just get a straight chorus signal, and it's just enough that it feels like it's not here. It feels it's in the center, but there's just something about bringing that chorus in here, that gives it something. You don't even really know it's there, but it just kind of makes your head, straighten back out again. So there's always
I usually end up, especially if it's kind of a pretty poppy produced kind of sounding thing, end up doing like an acoustic on this side, and then maybe a bazouki or a mandolin over here, and those kind of complement each other, and then the banjo ends up living somewhere in here, So you end up getting this kind of hillbilly Phil Spector wall of acoustics. So, somewhat, you know.
Cool. Well, let me wrap up on a couple of quick questions. I know I've taken much of your time.
Oh, good, man. It's been fun.
Yeah. If you had to leave the house with only one instrument, which one would it be?
For a gig or just for fun? Like just
hypothetical, your house is burning down.
Okay.
You can only take one. Yeah.
Oh man. I would probably grab my J45.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Good choice.
That's
you can always pick up another electric somewhere.
That's true. Well, and I've had that J45. That was like one of the first like nice acoustics I got early on, and I played it on just about every record I've been on. And sentimentally, it's like it's been here the longest.
Did you lose any? I know. Were you with Keith when you had the big flood in Nashville and you lost a bunch of?
I wasn't with Keith yet, but Soundcheck did my cartage at the time.
Yeah.
So all my studio rig was over there.
Did you lose anything?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, right. I lost a few amps died, a few guitars died, and the one that hurt the most, I had a Taylor when I was 18 probably, and first kind of was getting into like building a bit of a guitar rig. Yeah. I bought a Taylor acoustic, and somehow it ended up coming out of my trunk. So, the guitar trunk, somehow that guitar ended up coming out of it. So like as the water rose, I had guitars that were just floating inside the 10 by 10 locker,
Yeah.
And somehow that guitar ended up getting underneath my trunk somehow. I don't know if the trunk stayed full of air so it got, soaked with water. And as the trunk was coming down, the guitar literally just got squished down. And so that one hurt. That one, I actually still have that one. It's sitting in my garage. I can't bring myself to just like throw it in the dump.
Yeah.
But it's like way beyond repair. I still entertain the idea of maybe turning it into some kind of piece of art or putting it inside a coffee table or something. I don't know, but it's sitting out there.
Cool. Last question. Obviously you've played all over the place, and had, lots of different venues. Do you have a particular venue out there that or place or country or whatever it could be that you haven't played that you've always wanted to?
That I haven't played that I've always wanted to.
Yeah.
I would love to tour in Asia.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Never been. And I think that would be super cool to see and fun to do.
I think, you know what? I have to look. I think that was Jerry's answer too.
Was it?
Yeah.
It could have been.
Yeah, I think so. You guys are hanging out way too much. I'll have to look back because all of a sudden it's like a light went off. I think that's what Jerry said.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I'd say that's what I'd say too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a real pleasure having this chat with you, and
I got you.
I think it's pretty awesome that you're getting to spend some time there at home. And like I said, it's a rough time for everybody, but we're getting some good things out of it, and good luck with the producing side of stuff. And I've seen you perform a bunch of times with Keith. And actually, the last time I was going to ask you too, it was in Toronto at the Molson Amphitheater. And I think you were only like 4 or 5 shows in to would have probably been the last tour where you guys were locked into the tracks a lot more than you ever have been before. And it was awesome, but it was a different show. Like it was sort of like it felt like everyone and maybe it was like the 3rd show in or something like that. I knew it was really early, but you could tell everyone was still, I wouldn't say uncomfortable, but it was different dealing with being locked in like you guys were.
Yeah.
And
that's very astute of you. There's definitely something about like, I don't know, when you've got, it's one thing to use tracks like supplementary. And that's cool. And that's great. Loops and tambourines and shakers and stuff. I love that. But there's definitely when like 80% of your sound is coming from tracks, as a musician, it really paints you into a box, like into a corner. And you're like, I don't have the lane anymore. Like there's so much sonic information coming out that there's there's nothing I can add to this at times, you know.
Yeah.
There's definitely times when and it's not just on stage. Like there's records you play on where you get in there and you're like, man, there's so many things going on, and to quote Book, you know, there's times when you feel like you're trapped in a box of eighth notes. Yeah. It's like, what am I gonna do? There's nowhere, like, but you know, that's part of it too. There's aspects of that, you know, Keith especially really enjoys doing these days, and it's part of where he's going sonically with the records and wants to do
and you see the
thing.
point of it. I mean, the new albums are full of that. Yeah,
it's working.
Yeah.
So
but you could. It was interesting because you could feel the, you know, everyone trying to settle into this new kind of vibe.
Well, we had probably changed like 18 parts of the arrangements that day at soundcheck too, so we're probably trying to remember, is this an 8-bar turnaround or a 4-bar turnaround, or what part am I playing right now?
No, it's always been great, and love seeing you live, and looking forward to seeing a bunch of new music from.
Thank you, Sarah. This was fun. I enjoyed this combo. It's good.
Excellent. I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
I'll let you know. We'll just stay on. I'll finish up here, but we'll just say a proper goodbye. But thanks again.
Sounds good.
Oh, and if anyone wants to see anything that you're doing, reaching out, are you active on Facebook or Instagram, any of those things?
I am, yeah. Instagram, Rader, RADERATOR, like generator, only Rader.
Yeah, that's the place to find. Awesome. Well, thanks.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. We'll see you soon. Thanks.
Thanks.